This episode is brought to you by the European Co-working Assembly. We are everything Co-working Europe. If you head to the Co-working Assembly website, you can connect with our World Co-working, European Freelancers Week, Co-working Symposium, Co-working Library, and Co-working Tools.
Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this session today. And Natalie, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself in whatever way feels right for you, for our audience today.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Sash, for having me on the podcast. So very simply, I am Natalie du Toit. I am an Olympic and Paralympic swimmer. So yes, both competed both as a disabled athlete. And since retiring from swimming, I've started working in digital marketing and content creation. And with that, finding myself working with co-working and within the realm of co-working. Bringing a slightly different angle of sports and business together, and loving doing that because there's so many crossovers.
I mean, that's always the best introduction, isn't it? Just casually, an Olympic and Paralympic athlete, just casually. I mean, it's like the best party trick ever. So kind of getting into that, and obviously, you know, the area that we're going to be really getting into today is talking around accessibility, because that is your area of expertise and also lived experience. But I think first and foremost, bringing it back a little bit, can you describe what IDEA means to you? So our inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility.
So, wow, I think first and foremost for me, it is such a broad topic. It is a topic that you could probably discuss for days, for months, for years. And everyone has a slightly different take on it, which is something that I'm always interested to hear whenever, you know, everyone's talking about inclusion, diversity, the equity, accessibility. Each one of them brings a stance to not just life, but business, to every part of your being and my being. So for me, it is the holistic path to life. I was disabled 21 years ago. So it's kind of the year of 21st for me, which is interesting. 21 years out of school, having an accident and losing a leg. So that means that I come from, my history when I was younger, I had two legs and I was able-bodied. And then losing a limb at the age of 17. And, once I'd lost my limb, I realized how many amputees were out there, how many disabled people were out there. Whereas, beforehand, I wasn't quite open to a lot of that. And I think, being disabled has allowed me to see it, has allowed me to be put into situations where I might have felt uncomfortable or I felt completely comfortable. So if I had to touch on all four, being disabled, I think it falls into actually every one of those categories. The inclusion part, as a swimmer, I was able to compete in the able-bodied side of things because I qualified for events and I won medals and I was number one in South Africa in able-bodied, but I was also number one in the disabled events. And it was always a struggle because the able-bodied fraternity didn't want me to compete there because I was disabled, and the disabled fraternity said I was too good to be there, so they didn't want me to swim there. And everyone tried to put me in a box. And that was that's what life is about, right? It's precious because at the end of the day, you have goals, you have dreams, and you just want to live your life. You don't want someone to say to you, you must be like this or you mustn't be like that. And I think, that crosses the boundary between inclusion and it crosses the boundary between being diverse. Yes, I would love to get my leg back, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, this is who I am and this is, where I've got to go. And because I'm alive, I've got to keep going. So yes, being challenged along the way in terms of I was able-bodied and I know how I was treated then compared to as a disabled person and how I've been treated. You also have the other side of the spectrum, which is where, people just want to include you, or they feel like, for instance, they don't want you to walk far because you're disabled. And at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with me walking far. I just can't walk fast because my leg only goes a certain speed. Again, as an amputee, a lot of people would want me to walk up and down a ramp, but my prosthetic leg actually doesn't really clear the ramp when you walk up. And when you walk down, the knee can help me come down. So I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of education that needs to go into it. As I am an amputee, it doesn't mean that I know and feel exactly how amputees feel. It is, I have family members that are below knee amputees. I'm a 3-knee amputee, and I couldn't even help them learn how to walk because I don't have what they have. And I think that's the precious part about it, is being empathetic. It is asking, it is understanding, and not just assuming that you know what inclusion means or what diversity means or equity or accessibility when it comes to an individual. And rightfully so, some people also have a disability that you can't see. With that, every person that you meet or speak to, you should be empathetic to and get to know them and understand them a little before you judge, before you even think of inclusivity, etc. So, for me, it is something that I was thrown into the disability side of things. I kind of made to swim, excuse the pun. And I think every day I learn something new. Every day I learn that I have to be flexible. And flexibility is key. No matter if you have a disability, if you don't, I think flexibility is absolutely key. So it's a daily learning, and I learn daily within this realm as well. And then when it comes to business, I obviously couldn't do certain things because I'm an amputee. So I had to change what it is I was going to do as a job. And with that, I had to sort of also shift my life. And I think, everybody goes through challenges. It might not be visible, but everybody goes through challenges. And at the end of the day, it's just to be open, to be honest, and to go with it.
Thank you. That's such a, I think we have preconceptions about people's journeys, right? And what it can look like. And it's such a unique journey. And I think it's really interesting. You started by saying, I think that idea, these concepts, the words, the theories, whatever you want to call it, are unique to everybody. And we all have a slightly varied understanding of it. And I think that just hearing, your lived experience and what you've gone through, that is obviously going to give you a very different understanding and interpretation of what it means to feel included, to be in a diverse environment. And especially, that transition from one identity to another, but these identities that then become very core to who we are, right? I'm sure that pre having the amputation, you wouldn't have thought about being able-bodied as a key identity. Yet post actually having a disability is then a core identity to who you are, and how that can really shift. It's why I love talking about this topic and speaking to different people, because I think it really sums it up, right?
Absolutely. And you speak inclusion. I think at the end of the day, I have a disability. So as much as I would love to be included, and for example, I was part of an able-bodied team, and everybody would run to take the train in the UK, and I couldn't run. So I would be left behind. So as much as I wanted to be included, it was really difficult to be included. And I think sometimes we also have to understand that inclusivity doesn't mean you're included in the pack. Sometimes you can be included, but also different. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that is important to understand. That inclusion doesn't mean you're like everybody else, or that you must be like everybody else. It's okay to be slightly different, and do slightly different things, but also be included.
I love that. It really ties really closely to the equity piece and how we talk about, often we've spoken about equality, right? And everybody receives exactly the same opportunity, but equity is about being aware of those unique differences, right? And that being a core part of this is that it's not that we're all the same and that we can be treated all the same. We have to acknowledge that actually we are different. It's not a bad thing. it's just a fact of who we are, right? And what can we do to account for that, make the adjustments that are necessary in order for us, like you said, to feel included in an environment. So I want to get into the accessibility part. I feel like accessibility is a topic that organizations as a whole are striving to wrap their head around, understand. We are beyond the point now of it's just a ramp and a lift and a disabled toilet. And we understand that it's a lot more than just that. And it's a huge part of the conversation. I guess the fact that you're saying like 21 years now that you've, lived with a disability, what have you witnessed in this evolution of how we understand accessibility? And also, I guess, speaking, I'm sure listeners can hear, it's a very different accent to mine, but also living like internationally as well. How do you see the conversation evolving?
Oh, absolutely. I think I've been very, very fortunate to, in my swimming career, and I guess in traveling to experience different worlds. And I call it different worlds because, in South Africa, we don't really have the trains and the transport that you would in the UK or somewhere in Europe. So here we rely on cars and driving cars. If you are severely disabled and can't afford a car, those are many challenges that come with that. And maybe I can take you to something that I've experienced. Going to the Olympic Games, you actually see how they've built the village that one stays in the accommodation side of things and the venues that you go to in sport. You see that ramps are put up right next to the stairs. A lot of the time, a ramp is like around the back. And you see that conversation is changing, and buildings have it right next door now so that the ramp isn't, 10 kilometers long around the back of the building, but only is like 1 kilometer long and right next to the stairs. And again, here in South Africa, we don't walk a lot. So you'll notice that a lot of our pavements don't have the ability or accessibility for wheelchairs, doesn't have accessibility for, disabled people. And I think, that is going to start, changing slowly but surely. At our events, we can already see the narrative changing. So, for example, our headquarters, as I mentioned, had this ramp right at the back, and everybody had to sort of take a detour to go up the ramp to just get into the building. A lot of the times it's old buildings as well, right? So lifts really seldom work. I've seen wheelchairs being carried upstairs to get to events. So I think the conversation is now changing from we must have a ramp to the ramp must be, the smallest or the slightest possible. And it must be with everything else and not as like a standalone, for example. So yes, in terms of that's visual, right? In a games, we all compete with different disabilities. So I compete with arm amputees, leg amputees all together. We're all in a call-up room with visually impaired. We're in a call-up with, cerebral palsy. So we see the different disabilities. We see how different disabilities are handled. So the lower disabilities, meaning function is lower, they will have people that help them, whereas the higher functions don't have people that help them. But at the same time, if I had to get out the swimming pool, how do I get my leg on the side of the pool, which is wet and it's slippery and, things could really go wrong. So I think, looking at that, seeing the conversation going from, I think we should have a ramp. I see houses now being built here in South Africa with ramps. Some of them extremely steep, with no platforms at the top.
Nice. A workout then.
Absolutely. Or, wheelchair coming down and going straight for the bushes. But,
yeah.
But, at least we see more of it. And I think that the important part is to talk, to the education, to talk, to treat everything differently. Someone who has been disabled from birth is also very different to someone who has acquired a disability later on in life. It's different. I think there's different mental ways of thinking. You've experienced something where someone hasn't. Although I must say 21 years after losing my leg, I don't remember I don't remember what it feels like to walk properly with two legs anymore. So my brain has forgotten. So yes, I think the conversation is changing more to let's be more inclusive, let's be more diverse, let's be more equitable and accessible. I always like to look at equity as there's a picture online where there's all different heights of people, and they all have different blocks that they stand on to see over the wall. And for me in swimming, for example, if I wanted to compete able-bodied, I wasn't allowed to use an aid. So I had to swim without a leg. And I don't think if I had a leg, it would make any difference either, because I've got no muscle.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be able to use it, and it'd probably be as heavy as lead. So it would make me sink. And with that, my thinking was that I had to be as good as everybody else. And those that I competed against couldn't say, oh, but she's disabled, we're going to swim slower. And I've had a lot of those questions. So I think, as I keep mentioning, the conversation is going from how do we handle this to we need to handle it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's really been precious. It's gone from, in swimming, I was probably the only girl in my category in South Africa, and to having 2 heats. So that's 16 girls over like 8 years, to see that, and to see internationally how it's grown, to see the different classes that are coming out, because there's so many different disabilities that are now coming forward and wanting to take part in sport and feeling like they have the ability. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword in business as well. Once you give that opportunity, you've now got to accept that and go with it as well. And it can cause quite a bit of turmoil. But yes, I think that's kind of where we are is, in co-working now as well. It is, the focus is shifting to, we've now got this. How do we actually put this into action? How does it become inclusive? How do we help our communities. And I think the focus between community and inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility is becoming the focal point. And not just about, I'm disabled, how do you treat me? But it's, how am I going to focus within this community space right now?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, even just in those examples, like the perception around how we view disability and accessibility in the creation of events. And I think the Olympics is probably one of those sort of unique environments, both Olympics and Paralympics, whereby, it's where we see the most incredible diversity of people and all these different nations come together. And you see incredible sportsmanship between people who are, so far removed from each other in terms of probably their lived experience, right? And I think, I remember going to some of the Paralympics here in London, in the UK, and it was like this unique environment where actually, as somebody who is able-bodied, like that environment was not created for me. Like, I obviously was able to function within it and use it and utilize it, absolutely, but I wasn't the original, thought process behind everything that was created. It was absolutely thinking about the types of athletes and therefore the type of audience that would attend this event, and as a result, it ended up being one of the most successful Paralympics because it was, by design, it was created with that intention. And I think that it was an example of, what we can do in society at large, but what we often neglect to do is we create for the masses, and actually, forgetting that there are many other people that sit outside of that conventional box of what we like to say is, in inverted commas here, normal, very much in inverted commas. You brought up co-working, and I wanted to get into this and connect kind of the two now. Obviously, we see co-working has the ability to be at the forefront of a lot of things. As we went through a global pandemic, we saw the beauty of co-working as this sort of golden light at the end of the tunnel of, we're going back into the working world, but you may not feel comfortable traveling 2 hours to get to your office, but you can go to a co-working space around the corner from you, right? And so what do you think in terms of accessibility? What is it that co-working has to offer that maybe a conventional workplace can't offer with regards to accessibility?
So interestingly enough, I think where we at in terms of the co-working side of things is a space doesn't have to be everything. A space caters for its community, and that is the precious part about it. That is the empathy, right? Is understanding what is around you, understanding who uses your space, understanding who you would like to use your space as well. I mentioned the Olympics and the Paralympics, and you mentioned also, how you felt like it wasn't created for an able-bodied person, it was created for disabled or person with disabilities. So again, when the Olympic Village closes, the buses, everybody gets out the village, and the Paralympic Village is being built or gets built. And with that, you actually see buses come in that drop. It is the simple things, but what's really important is I have friends who used to compete with me that have been part of the process in creating that village, in creating that space that the athletes will stay in. One of the challenges that we had at one of the games was that in order to get to the balcony, the wheelchair couldn't go around the bed. So you physically had to move the bed in order to get to the balcony. And the rooms are tiny, right? They're like university rooms. But again, as a disabled person, you would then figure out a way to move the bed to get onto the balcony if that's something that you'd like to do. And I think that's what a co-working space has the ability to do. It is the ability to cater for people that are around you and that you would like to come to your space. And it doesn't just go for disability, right? It goes for, whatever, race, gender, whatever it is. And I think that's the important part about it. I would probably travel 2 hours to a space that I enjoy or that caters for me. And so that's something that's been very different and something that we've seen as a gap within the co-working community. And as a disabled person, to tell you the honest truth, I probably wouldn't go to a fully accessible place because of my type of my disability. But I would go where, I could speak with people. I could, meet people. And I think, again, this breaks it down not just into inclusion, but also into a means of what you would like to achieve as a space. And I don't think a business itself would be able to do that because there's corporate culture that one adheres to as much as there is a culture within a space as well. So I think it's up to the space now to create that culture, to create that environment that people would frequent and would like to come and work at. And businesses also can align with in order to also frequent. So yes, there's a massive topic around that and massive opportunity. And I think we just started exploring that. So there's lots of exploration still to happen. And really a space that is, seen in the trends as something that is growing and something that's going to become something of the future.
Yeah, and I think it's almost that sense of freedom that I think that co-working spaces have, where you're creating a community that, as you said, caters to the people within that community, right? It's not trying to be an all-reaching global brand taking over an entire industry. It's, we have this community, we live in this borough. Who are the people that are here? What do they need? What can we provide? And that immediate connection, so often you see, I guess, in corporate culture, not that it's 100% a bad thing, but you'll have this little startup which starts very much grassroots with all these beautiful ideas, and then it spirals and becomes a big thing, and all of a sudden all of those beautiful moments of being able to really connect and understand customers and the people that are engaging with your product or your space, you lose that. And it's one thing that co-working can continue to have day in, day out, year on year, is really connecting with that community and understanding what can we do, where possible for you in order to create the best space for you to be able to do your best. I always like to kind of get to resources and points of reference that people can go to, because this conversation is already as if you haven't learned a whole heap of things anyway. But in particular, are there any resources, videos, points of reference that you can direct people to if they want to kind of expand their knowledge and learn more about the topic of accessibility?
So I think for me, it is a resource is always to Google. I think I'm going to just go out there and say that because everyone is diverse. You can get to a link and anyone can give you a link of something, but is it pertinent for you? And I think that is something that's really important. As I mentioned, cultures is something that we all want to belong to. We all want to feel like we're worthy. And I think, if whoever you are, if you are going to a co-working space, if you own a co-working space, it is, Google information, Google how to treat someone that is visually impaired, how to treat someone who, isn't the same color as you. At the end of the day, do you treat them any differently as human beings? I find a lot of the times, and I'll give an example, if people are visually impaired, you often find that people start shouting when they speak to them, right? At the end of the day, it's all very strange. And I know that I've roomed with a visually impaired girl and I keep forgetting to guide her. She asks me to guide her. And every time I say to her, please don't get me to guide you because I forget. She's walked into the wall and, had stitches in her eyes because I've forgotten to tell her there was a wall, actually to give her space so that she can walk through.
Yeah.
So again, we make mistakes and that's okay. But to arm yourself with that important information, I will mention the European Co-working Assembly handbook that was put together. I think as part of that book, it is a tool for co-working, but there is so much more to it. There is the ability to go across different industries, the ability to understand beyond your understanding. And it also makes you question more. And I think that's what's precious about it, because every day I learn more about different disabilities. As I said, I've got family members who are slightly different to me, and every day they have what we would call a niggle or something wrong that, I haven't experienced. And okay, cool. That's what happens. And this is how you fix it. Slowly but surely, for me, my leg, I'm a free knee. So my knee is 1.5 knees and it bends a bit lower. And with that, if I get onto a bicycle, I actually have to put a rubber band around my foot to keep my foot on the pedal. And it's something so stupid. Like when I walk with slip slops, I actually put Velcro on my shoes so that my shoe doesn't go flying off my foot. But again, those are things that you can't Google, but you come up with ways and means, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is just be open-minded. If you're not sure, go to Google, go to whichever browser you'd like to go to. The Easy Handbook is there. And it is really broad. I think that is the precious part about it, is you can actually look into it and take whatever you want away from it. And it allows you to get the broader spectrum of things. So definitely that. And also just to look out at people if you can see any visibility, if you can see someone being treated badly, if you can see, I work on a team with team members that they call themselves they, and being respectful of that and saying they and using pronouns and being respectful of what the other person would like as well. It's not just about you. So I think from that perspective, it's just being open-minded, go out there and learn and watch and see and just, grow. It is going to grow further. It's going to become a conversation that is not just a conversation. There's going to be a lot of action points with it. We can already see things changing, dramatically within the sporting realm, within the co-working realm. And I think it's exciting. It's exciting times for me to grow up in and to be a part of.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of ways in which the sporting world can be a leader in a lot of these areas. We see it particularly around, diversity as a topic in many different forms of sport, right? Whether that's football, Formula One, right? Olympics, everything. So, I'm very excited to see sort of this conversation become more mainstream and like just part of the discussion, right? Rather than like, oh, we're being trendy by talking about accessibility. No, we just talk about it because it's part of our everyday. It's part of our business strategy. It's what we need to do. I'm going to drop one resource for you. It is a book that I read a little while ago. It is called, I'm going to double check the author for you now, Disability Visibility. A book by Alice Wong, or edited by Alice Wong. And it is a compilation of first-person stories of lots of different people who have a variety of different disabilities, and they are sharing, little essays and stories about their lived experience. But it's a really broad spectrum. And there was a lot of really eye-opening conversations and stories. I heard like a guy who was in prison and was deaf. So what is your experience in a prison as a deaf person when everything is sound and alarms and you have no concept of that? And that's just kind of one of them, but it gives you definitely food for thought. Okay, so thank you so much, Natalie. I got to chat to an Olympian today. That sounds cool. Just started my Monday talking to an Olympian. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. Where can people find you if they do want to connect with you outside of the podcast?
You're welcome just to contact me. Any social media, I'm Nats du Toit, Nats du Toit, or Natalie du Toit. You can Google me as a swimmer. It's really easy to get in touch with me that way, or via email, natalie@innercom.co.za. So it's 2 N's and 2 M's in InnoCom. But yes, I think, it's been great to be on this podcast. And I think as a conversation starter, as taking the conversation further, so many ideas and so many examples out there that one can use. And I think it's just be open, be willing to accept, be willing to change. And life is about change. Life is about accepting, right? So, again, in sport, we're going through a massive shift because so many of disabilities have realized that sport is an amazing tool. And I think in business, once we start opening that more within the co-working spaces, people are going to, come out of all the corners and want to frequent spaces, want to meet people, and want to be part of something that they're proud of. And that they're proud to be associated with. So, looking forward to it. And thank you very much for the conversation. And I look forward to the conversation going further.
Thank you so much. For sure, everyone is jumping on Google right now to Google your name and see your Olympic journey. Even if that's the one thing that happens, and suddenly Google hits for your name today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us once again for another podcast. We'll be back with more interesting conversations around IDEA. But other than that, have a great day from me. Once again, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. And a huge thank you to Natalie, the Olympian. I hope you found it incredibly useful. Hopefully you feel inspired to get on Google and find out a little bit more. For sure, please check out the resources that were mentioned in today's podcast. And feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn, Tash Costa Thomas. Until next time, have a great day.